tonight's gentle reading of a timeless classic. Tonight, we begin Bellamy by Guy de Maupassant, Part 2. A richly woven tale of charm, ambition, and quiet desire set in the elegant world of 19th century Paris. We follow Georges Duroy, a man of modest beginnings, as he steps into a glittering society where wit and charm often matter more than wealth or birth. With each encounter, he climbs higher, drawing others in with his smile and ambition. As the lights of Paris fade into evening, let the quiet rhythm of this story guide you into calm reflection and rest. If this brings you peace, please subscribe and leave a comment. Your support helps us share more soothing journeys like this. Now breathe deeply, settle in, and let's begin Bellamy, Part 2. Chapter 7. Charles's absence gave Duroy a more important position on La Vie Francaise. Only one matter arose to annoy him. Otherwise, his sky was cloudless. An insignificant paper, La Plume, attacked him constantly, or rather attacked the editor of the Echoes of La Vie Francaise. Jacques Rival said to him one day, "You are very forbearing. What should I do? It is no direct attack." But one afternoon, when he entered the office, Boisrenard handed him a number of La Plume. "See, here is another unpleasant remark for you." Relative to what? To the arrest of one Dame Aubert. Georges took the paper and read a scathing personal denunciation. Duroy, it seems, had written an item claiming that Dame Aubert, who, as the editor of La Plume claimed, had been put under arrest, was a myth. The latter retaliated by accusing Duroy of receiving bribes and of suppressing matter that should be published. As Saint Potin entered, Duroy asked him, "Have you seen the paragraph in La Plume?" "Yes, and I have just come from Dame Aubert S. She is no myth, but she has not been arrested. That report has no foundation." Duroy went at once to M. Walter's office. After hearing the case, the manager bade him go to the woman's house himself, find out the details, and reply to the article. Duroy set out upon his errand, and on his return to the office, wrote the following. An anonymous writer in La Plume is trying to pick a quarrel with me on the subject of an old woman who, he claims, was arrested for disorderly conduct, which I deny. I have myself seen Dame Aubert, who is 60 years old at least. She told me the particulars of her dispute with a butcher as to the weight of some cutlets, which dispute necessitated an explanation before a magistrate. That is the whole truth in a nutshell. As for the other insinuations, I scorn them. One never should reply to such things, moreover, when they are written under a mask. Georges Duroy. M. Walter and Jacques Rival considered that sufficient, and it was decided that it should be published in that day's issue. Duroy returned home rather agitated and uneasy. What would this opponent reply? Who was he? Why that attack? He passed a restless night. When he reread his article in the paper the next morning, he thought it more aggressive in print than it was in writing. He might, it seemed to him, have softened certain terms. He was excited all day and feverish during the night. He rose early to obtain an issue of La Plume, which should contain the reply to his note. He ran his eyes over the columns and at first saw nothing. He was beginning to breathe more freely when these words met his eye. M. Dure of La Vie Francaise gives us the lie. In doing so, he lies. He owns, however, that a woman named Aubert exists, and that she was taken before a magistrate by an agent. 2 words only remain to be added to the word agent, which are of morals, and all is told. But the consciences of certain journalists are on a par with their talents. I sign myself Louis Langremont. George's heart throbbed violently, and he returned home in order to dress himself. He had been insulted, and in such a manner that it was impossible to hesitate. Why had he been insulted? For nothing. On account of an old woman who had quarreled with her butcher. He dressed hastily and repaired to M. Walter's house, although it was scarcely 8 o'clock. M. Walter was reading La Plume. Well, he said gravely, on perceiving Dure, you cannot let that pass. The young man did not reply. The manager continued, go at once in search of Rival, who will look after your interests. Dure stammered several vague words and set out for Rival's house. Jacques was still in bed, but he rose when the bell rang, and having read the insulting paragraph, said, whom would you like to have besides me? I do not know. Bois Renard. Yes. Are you a good swordsman? No. A good shot. I have used a pistol a good deal. Good, come and exercise while I attend to everything. Wait a moment. He entered his dressing room and soon reappeared, washed, shaven, and presentable. Come with me, said he. He lived on the ground floor, and he led Dure into a cellar, converted into a room for the practice of fencing and shooting. He produced a pair of pistols and began to give his orders as briefly as if they were on the dueling ground. He was well satisfied with Dure's use of the weapons and told him to remain there and practice until noon, when he would return to take him to lunch and tell him the result of his mission. Left to his own devices, Dure aimed at the target several times and then sat down to reflect. Such affairs were abominable anyway. What would a respectable man gain by risking his life? And he recalled Norbert de Varenne's remarks made to him a short while before. He was right, he declared aloud. It was gloomy in that cellar, as gloomy as in a tomb. What o'clock was it? The time dragged slowly on. Suddenly he heard footsteps, voices, and Jacques Rival reappeared accompanied by Bois Renard. The former cried on perceiving Dure, all is settled. Dure thought the matter had terminated with a letter of apology. His heart gave a bound, and he stammered, ah, thank you. Rival continued, M. Langremont has accepted every condition. 25 paces, fire when the pistol is leveled and the order given. Then he added, now let us lunch. It is past 12 o'clock. They repaired to a neighboring restaurant. Dure was silent. He ate that they might not think he was frightened, and went in the afternoon with Bois Renard to the office, where he worked in an absent, mechanical manner. Before leaving, Jacques Rival shook hands with him and warned him that he and Boisrenard would call for him in a carriage the next morning at 7 o'clock to repair to the wood at Vessinet, where the meeting was to take place. All had been settled without his saying a word, giving his opinion, accepting or refusing, with such rapidity that his brain whirled, and he scarcely knew what was taking place. He returned home about 9 o'clock in the evening after having dined with Boisrenard, who had not left him all day. When he was alone, he paced the floor. He was too confused to think. One thought alone filled his mind, and that was a duel tomorrow. He sat down and began to meditate. He had thrown upon his table his adversary's card brought him by Rival. He read it for the 20th time that day. Louis Langremont, 176, Rue Montmartre. Nothing more. Who was the man? How old was he? How tall? How did he look? How odious that a total stranger should, without rhyme or reason, out of pure caprice, annoy him thus on account of an old woman's quarrel with her butcher. He said aloud, "The brute," and glared angrily at the card. He began to feel nervous. The sound of his voice made him start. He drank a glass of water and laid down. He turned from his right side to his left uneasily. He was thirsty. He rose. He felt restless. Am I afraid? He asked himself. Why did his heart palpitate so wildly at the slightest sound? He began to reason philosophically on the possibility of being afraid. No, certainly he was not, since he was ready to fight. Still, he felt so deeply moved that he wondered if one could be afraid in spite of oneself. What would happen if that state of things should exist? If he should tremble or lose his presence of mind? He lighted his candle and looked in the glass. He scarcely recognized his own face. It was so changed. Suddenly he thought, tomorrow at this time I may be dead. He turned to his couch and saw himself stretched lifeless upon it. He hastened to the window and opened it, but the night air was so chilly that he closed it, lighted a fire, and began to pace the floor once more, saying mechanically, I must be more composed. I will write to my parents in case of accident. He took a sheet of paper and after several attempts began, My dear father and mother, at daybreak I am going to fight a duel, and as something might happen, he could write no more. He rose with a shudder. It seemed to him that notwithstanding his efforts, he would not have the strength necessary to face the meeting. He wondered if his adversary had ever fought before, if he were known. He had never heard his name. However, if he had not been a remarkable shot, he would not have accepted that dangerous weapon without hesitation. He ground his teeth to prevent his crying aloud. Suddenly he remembered that he had a bottle of brandy. He fetched it from the cupboard and soon emptied it. Now he felt his blood course more warmly through his veins. I have found a means, said he. Day broke. He began to dress when his heart failed him. He took more brandy. At length there was a knock at the door. His friends had come. They were wrapped in furs. After shaking hands, Rival said, It is as cold as Siberia. Is all well? Yes. Are you calm? Very calm. Have you eaten? and drunk something. I do not need anything. They descended the stairs. A gentleman was seated in the carriage. Rival said, Dr. Liberment. Duray shook hands with him and stammered, Thank you, as he entered the carriage. Jacques Rival and Boyce Renard followed him, and the coachman drove off. He knew where to go. The conversation flagged, although the doctor related a number of anecdotes. Rival alone replied to him. Duray tried to appear self-possessed, but he was haunted continually by the fear of showing his feelings or of losing his self-possession. Rival addressed him, saying, I took the pistols to Gaston Renette. He loaded them. The box is sealed. Duray replied mechanically, Thank you. Then Rival proceeded to give him minute directions, that he might make no mistakes. Duray repeated those directions, as children learn their lessons in order to impress them upon his memory. As he muttered the phrases over and over, he almost prayed that some accident might happen to the carriage, if he could only break his leg. At the end of a glade, he saw a carriage standing, and 4 gentlemen stamping their feet in order to keep them warm, and he was obliged to gasp in order to get breath. Rival and Boyce Renard alighted first, then the doctor and the combatant. Rival took the box of pistols, and with Boyce Renard approached the 2 strangers, who were advancing toward them. Duray saw them greet one another ceremoniously, then walk through the glade together as they counted the paces. Dr. Liberment asked Duray, Do you feel well? Do you not want anything? Nothing, thank you. It seemed to him that he was asleep, that he was dreaming. Was he afraid? He did not know. Jacques Rival returned and said in a low voice, All is ready. Fortune has favored us in the drawing of the pistols. That was a matter of indifference to Duray. They helped him off with his overcoat, led him to the ground set apart for the duel, and gave him his pistol. Before him stood a man, short, stout, and bald, who wore glasses. That was his adversary. A voice broke the silence, a voice which came from afar. Are you ready, sirs? Georges cried, Yes. The same voice commanded, Fire. Duray heard nothing more, saw nothing more. He only knew that he raised his arm and pressed with all his strength upon the trigger. Soon he saw a little smoke before him. His opponent was still standing in the same position, and there was a small white cloud above his head. They had both fired. All was over. His second and the doctor felt him, unbuttoned his garments, and asked anxiously, Are you wounded? He replied, No, I think not. Langremont was not wounded either, and Jacques Rival muttered discontentedly, That is always the way with those cursed pistols. One either misses or kills one's opponent. Duray was paralyzed with surprise and joy. All was over. He felt that he could fight the entire universe. All was over. What bliss! He felt brave enough to provoke anyone. The seconds consulted several moments. Then the duelists and their friends entered the carriages and drove off. When the official report was drawn up, it was handed to Duray, who was to insert it in the echoes. He was surprised to find that 2 balls had been fired. He said to Rival, We only fired once. The latter smiled. Yes, once each, that makes twice. And Duroy, satisfied with that explanation, asked no more questions. Walter embraced him. Bravo, you have defended the colors of La Vie Francaise. Bravo. The following day, at 11 o'clock in the forenoon, Duroy received a telegram. My God, I have been frightened. Come at once to Rue de Constantinople, that I may embrace you, my love. How brave you are. I adore you. Chloe. He repaired to the place appointed, and Mme. de Morel rushed into his arms, covering him with kisses. Oh, my darling, if you only knew how I felt when I read the morning papers. Tell me all about it. Duroy was obliged to give her a detailed account. You must have had a terrible night before the duel. Why, no, I slept very well. I should not have closed my eyes. Tell me what took place on the ground. Forthwith, he proceeded to give her a graphic description of the duel. When he had concluded, she said to him, I cannot live without you. I must see you, and with my husband in Paris, it is not very convenient. I often have an hour early in the morning when I could come and embrace you, but I cannot enter that horrible house of yours. What can we do? He asked abruptly, How much do you pay here? 100 francs a month. Very well, I will take the apartments on my own account, and I will move at once. Mine are not suitable anyway for me now. She thought a moment, and then replied, No, I do not want you to. He asked in surprise, Why not? Because that is no reason. These rooms suit me very well. I am here. I shall remain. He laughed. Moreover, they were hired in my name. But she persisted. No, I do not wish you to. Why not then? She whispered softly, tenderly. Because you would bring others here, and I do not wish you to. Indignantly he cried, Never, I promise you. You would do so, in spite of your promise. I swear I will not. Truly, upon my word of honor. This is our nest, ours alone. She embraced him in a transport of delight. Then I agree, my dearest. But if you deceive me once, just once, that will end all between us forever. He protested, and it was agreed that he should settle in the rooms that same day. She said to him, You must dine with us Sunday. My husband thinks you charming. He was flattered, indeed. Yes, you have made a conquest. Did you not tell me that your home was in the country? Yes, why? Then you know something about agriculture. Yes. Very well. Talk to him of gardening and crops. He enjoys those subjects. All right, I shall not forget. She left him, after lavishing upon him innumerable caresses. Chapter 8. Duroy moved his effects to the apartments in Rue de Constantinople. 2 or 3 times a week, Mme. de Morel paid him visits. Duroy, to counterbalance them, dined at her house every Thursday and delighted her husband by talking agriculture to him. It was almost the end of February. Duroy was free from care. One night, when he returned home, he found a letter under his door. He examined the postmark. It was from Cannes. Having opened it, he read, Can Villajoli. Dear sir and friend, you told me, did you not, that I could count upon you at any time? Very well. I have a favor to ask of you. It is to come and help me, not to leave me alone during Charles's last moments. He may not live through the week, although he is not confined to his bed, but the doctor has warned me. I have not the strength nor the courage to see that agony day and night, and I think with terror of the approaching end. I can only ask such a thing of you, for my husband has no relatives. You were his comrade. He helped you to your position. Come, I beg of you. I have no one else to ask. Your friend, Madeline Forestier. Georges murmured, Certainly I will go, poor Charles. The manager, to whom he communicated the contents of that letter, grumblingly gave his consent. He repeated, But return speedily. You are indispensable to us. Georges Duret left for Cannes the next day by the 7 o'clock express, after having warned Mme. de Morel by telegram. He arrived the following day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. A commissionaire conducted him to Villajoli. The house was small and low, and of the Italian style of architecture. A servant opened the door and cried, Oh, sir, Madame is awaiting you patiently. Duret asked, How is your master? Not very well, sir. He will not be here long. The floor of the drawing room, which the young man entered, was covered with a Persian rug. The large windows looked upon the village and the sea. Duret murmured, How cozy it is here. Where the deuce do they get the money from? The rustling of a gown caused him to turn. Mme. Forestier extended both her hands, saying, How kind of you to come. She was a trifle paler and thinner, but still as bright as ever, and perhaps prettier for being more delicate. She whispered, It is terrible, he knows he cannot be saved, and he tyrannizes over me. I have told him of your arrival, but where is your trunk? Duret replied, I left it at the station, not knowing which hotel you would advise me to stop at, in order to be near you. She hesitated, then said, You must stop here at the villa. Your chamber is ready. He might die any moment, and if it should come in the night, I would be alone. I will send for your luggage. He bowed, As you will. Now let us go upstairs, said she. He followed her. She opened a door on the first floor, and Duret saw a form near a window, seated in an easy chair and wrapped in coverlets. He divined that it was his friend, though he scarcely recognized him. Forestier raised his hand slowly and with difficulty, saying, You are here. You have come to see me die. I am much obliged. Duret forced a smile. To see you die. That would not be a very pleasant sight, and I would not choose that occasion on which to visit Cannes. I came here to rest. Sit down, said Forestier, and he bowed his head as if deep in hopeless meditation. Seeing that he did not speak, his wife approached the window and, pointing to the horizon, said, Look at that. Is it not beautiful? In spite of himself, Duret felt the grandeur of the closing day and exclaimed, Yes, indeed, it is magnificent. Forestier raised his head and said to his wife, give me more air. She replied, You must be careful, it is late. The sun is setting. You will catch more cold, and that would be a serious thing in your condition. He made a feeble gesture of anger with his right hand and said, I tell you I am suffocating. What difference does it make if I die a day sooner or later, since I must die? She opened the window wide. The air was soft and balmy. Forestier inhaled it in feverish gasps. He grasped the arms of his chair and said in a low voice, Shut the window. I would rather die in a cellar. His wife slowly closed the window, then leaned her brow against the pane and looked out. Duroy, ill at ease, wished to converse with the invalid to reassure him, but he could think of no words of comfort. He stammered, Have you not been better since you are here? His friend shrugged his shoulders impatiently. You will see very soon. And he bowed his head again. Duroy continued, At home it is still wintry. It snows, hails, rains, and is so dark that they have to light the lamps at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Forestier asked, Is there anything new at the office? Nothing. They have taken little Lacrin of the Voltaire to fill your place, but he is incapable. It is time you came back. The invalid muttered, I will soon be writing under 6 feet of sod. A long silence ensued. Mimi. Forestier did not stir. She stood with her back to the room, her face toward the window. At length, Forestier broke the silence in a gasping voice, heartrending to listen to. How many more sunsets shall I see? 8, 10, 15, 20, or perhaps 30, no more. You have more time, you two. As for me, all is at an end, and everything will go on when I am gone, as if I were here. He paused a few moments, then continued. Everything that I see reminds me that I shall not see them long. It is horrible. I shall no longer see the smallest objects, the glasses, the dishes, the beds on which we rest, the carriages. It is fine to drive in the evening. How I loved all that. Again, Norbert de Varenne's words occurred to Dora. The room grew dark. Forestier asked irritably, Are we to have no lamp tonight? That is what is called caring for an invalid. The form outlined against the window disappeared, and an electric bell was heard to ring. A servant soon entered and placed a lamp upon the mantelpiece. Mimi. Forestier asked her husband, Do you wish to retire, or will you go downstairs to dinner? I will go down to dinner. The meal seemed to Duroy interminable, for there was no conversation. Only the ticking of a clock broke the silence. When they had finished, Duroy, pleading fatigue, retired to his room and tried in vain to invent some pretext for returning home as quickly as possible. He consoled himself by saying, Perhaps it will not be for long. The next morning Georges rose early and strolled down to the beach. When he returned, the servant said to him, Monsieur has asked for you 2 or 3 times. Will you go upstairs? He ascended the stairs. Forestier appeared to be in a chair. His wife, reclining upon a couch, was reading. The invalid raised his head. Dora asked, Well, how are you? You look better this morning. Forestier murmured, Yes, I am better and stronger. Lunch as hastily as you can with Madeline, because we are going to take a drive. When Mme. Forestier was alone with Duray, she said to him, "You see, today he thinks he is better. He is making plans for tomorrow. We are now going to Gulf Juan to buy pottery for our rooms in Paris. He is determined to go, but he cannot stand the jolting on the road." The carriage arrived. Forestier descended the stairs, step by step, supported by his servant. When he saw the closed landau, he wanted it uncovered. His wife opposed him. "It is sheer madness. You will take cold." He persisted. "No, I am going to be better, I know it." They first drove along a shady road, and then took the road by the sea. Forestier explained the different points of interest. Finally, they arrived at a pavilion over which were these words, "Gulf Juan Art Pottery," and the carriage drew up at the door. Forestier wanted to buy a vase to put on his bookcase. As he could not leave the carriage, they brought the pieces to him one by one. It took him a long time to choose, consulting his wife and Duray. "You know it is for my study. From my easy chair, I can see it constantly. I prefer the ancient form, the Greek." At length he made his choice. "I shall return to Paris in a few days," said he. On their way home along the Gulf, a cool breeze suddenly sprang up, and the invalid began to cough. At first it was nothing, only a slight attack, but it grew worse and turned to a sort of hiccup, a rattle. Forestier choked, and every time he tried to breathe he coughed violently. Nothing quieted him. He had to be carried from the landau to his room. The heat of the bed did not stop the attack, which lasted until midnight. The first words the sick man uttered were to ask for a barber, for he insisted on being shaved every morning. He rose to be shaved, but was obliged to go to bed at once, and began to breathe so painfully that Mme. Forestier, in a fright, woke Duray and asked him to fetch the doctor. He returned almost immediately with Dr. Gavant, who prescribed for the sick man. When the journalist asked him his opinion, he said, "It is the final stage. He will be dead tomorrow morning. Prepare that poor young wife and send for a priest. I can do nothing more. However, I am entirely at your disposal." Duray went to Mme. Forestier. "He is going to die. The doctor advises me to send for a priest. What will you do?" She hesitated a moment, and then said slowly, "I will go and tell him that the cure wishes to see him. Will you be kind enough to procure one who will require nothing but the confession, and who will not make much fuss?" The young man brought with him a kind old priest who accommodated himself to circumstances. When he had entered the death chamber, Mme. Forestier went out and seated herself with Duray in an adjoining room. "That has upset him," said she. When I mentioned the priest to him, his face assumed a scared expression. He knew that the end was near. I shall never forget his face. At that moment they heard the priest saying to him, "Why, no, you are not so low as that. You are ill, but not in danger. The proof of that is that I came as a friend, a neighbor." They could not hear his reply. The priest continued, "No, I shall not administer the sacrament. We will speak of that when you are better. If you will only confess, I ask no more. I am a pastor. I take advantage of every occasion to gather in my sheep. A long silence followed. Then, suddenly, the priest said, in the tone of one officiating at the altar, "The mercy of God is infinite. Repeat the Confiteor, my son. Perhaps you have forgotten it. I will help you. Repeat with me, Confiteor Dio omnipotenti, Beta Maria semper Virgini." He paused from time to time to permit the dying man to catch up to him. Then he said, "Now confess." The sick man murmured something. The priest repeated, "You have committed sins. Of what kind, my son?" The young woman rose and said simply, "Let us go into the garden. We must not listen to his secrets." They seated themselves upon a bench before the door, beneath a blossoming rose bush. After several moments of silence, Dure asked, "Will it be some time before you return to Paris?" "No," she replied. "When all is over, I will go back. In about 10 days. Yes, at most." He continued, "Charles has no relatives then." "None save cousins. His father and mother died when he was very young. In the course of a few minutes, the servant came to tell them that the priest had finished, and together they ascended the stairs. Forestier seemed to have grown thinner since the preceding day. The priest was holding his hand. "Au revoir, my son. I will come again tomorrow morning," and he left. When he was gone, the dying man, who was panting, tried to raise his 2 hands toward his wife and gasped, save me, my darling. I do not want to die. Oh, save me, go for the doctor. I will take anything. I do not want to die." He wept. The tears coursed down his pallid cheeks. Then his hands commenced to wander hither and thither continually, slowly, and regularly, as if gathering something on the coverlet. His wife, who was also weeping, sobbed, "No, it is nothing. It is only an attack. You will be better tomorrow. You tired yourself with that drive." Forestier drew his breath quickly, and so faintly that one could scarcely hear him. He repeated, "I do not want to die. Oh, my God, what has happened to me? I cannot see. Oh, my God." His staring eyes saw something invisible to the others. His hands plucked continually at the counterpane. Suddenly he shuddered and gasped, "The cemetery, my God." He did not speak again. He lay there motionless and ghastly. The hours dragged on. The clock of a neighboring convent chimed noon. Dore left the room to obtain some food. He returned an hour later, MME. Forestier would eat nothing. The invalid had not stirred. The young woman was seated in an easy chair at the foot of the bed. Dure likewise seated himself, and they watched in silence. A nurse, sent by the doctor, had arrived and was dozing by the window. Dure himself was almost asleep when he felt a presentiment that something was about to happen. He opened his eyes just in time to see Forestier close his. He coughed slightly, and 2 streams of blood issued from the corners of his mouth and flowed upon his night robe. His hands ceased their perpetual motion. He had breathed his last. His wife, perceiving it, uttered a cry and fell upon her knees by the bedside. George's in surprise and affright, mechanically made the sign of the cross. The nurse, awakening, approached the bed and said, "It has come." Duroy, recovering his self-possession, murmured with a sigh of relief, "It was not as hard as I feared it would be." That night, MME. Forestier and Duroy watched in the chamber of death. They were alone beside him who was no more. They did not speak. George's eyes seemed attracted to that emaciated face, which the flickering light made more hollow. That was his friend, Charles Forestier, who the day before had spoken to him. For several years he had lived, eaten, laughed, loved, and hoped as did everyone, and now all was ended for him forever. Life lasted a few months or years, and then fled. One was born, grew, was happy, and died. Adieu, man or woman, you will never return to earth. He thought of the insects which live several hours, of the feasts which live several days, of the men who live several years, of the worlds which last several centuries. What was the difference between one and the other? A few more dawns, that was all. Duroy turned away his eyes in order not to see the corpse. MME. Forestier's head was bowed, her fair hair enhanced the beauty of her sorrowful face. The young man's heart grew hopeful. Why should he lament when he had so many years still before him? He glanced at the handsome widow. How had she ever consented to marry that man? Then he pondered upon all the hidden secrets of their lives. He remembered that he had been told of a Count de Vaudrec who had dowered and given her in marriage. What would she do now? Whom would she marry? Had she projects, plans? He would have liked to know. Why that anxiety as to what she would do? Georges questioned himself and found that it was caused by a desire to win her for himself. Why should he not succeed? He was positive that she liked him. She would have confidence in him, for she knew that he was intelligent, resolute, tenacious. Had she not sent for him? Was not that a kind of avowal? He was impatient to question her, to find out her intentions. He would soon have to leave that villa, for he could not remain alone with the young widow. Therefore, he must find out her plans before returning to Paris, in order that she might not yield to another's entreaties. He broke the oppressive silence by saying, "You must be fatigued." "Yes, but above all I am grieved." Their voices sounded strange in that room. They glanced involuntarily at the corpse, as if they expected to see it move. Duroy continued, "It is a heavy blow for you, and will make a complete change in your life." She sighed deeply, but did not reply. He added, "It is very sad for a young woman like you to be left alone." He paused. She still did not reply, and he stammered, "At any rate, you will remember the compact between us. You can command me as you will. I am yours." She held out her hand to him and said mournfully and gently, "Thanks, you are very kind. If I can do anything for you, I say too, count on me." He took her proffered hand, gazed at it, and was seized with an ardent desire to kiss it. Slowly, he raised it to his lips and then relinquished it. As her delicate fingers lay upon her knee, the young widow said gravely, "Yes, I shall be all alone, but I shall force myself to be brave." He did not know how to tell her that he would be delighted to wed her. Certainly, it was no time to speak to her on such a subject. However, he thought he might be able to express himself by means of some phrase which would have a hidden meaning and would infer what he wished to say. But that rigid corpse lay between them. The atmosphere became oppressive, almost suffocating. Duray asked, "Can we not open the window a little? The air seems to be impure." "Certainly," she replied. "I have noticed it too." He opened the window, letting in the cool night air. He turned. "Come and look out. It is delightful." She glided softly to his side. He whispered, "Listen to me. Do not be angry that I broach the subject at such a time, but the day after tomorrow I shall leave here, and when you return to Paris it might be too late. You know that I am only a poor devil who has his position to make, but I have the will and some intelligence, and I am advancing. A man who has attained his ambition knows what to count on. A man who has his way to make does not know what may come. It may be better or worse. I told you one day that my most cherished dream was to have a wife like you. I repeat it to you today. Do not reply, but let me continue. This is no proposal. The time and place would render it odious. I only wish to tell you that by a word you can make me happy, and that you can make of me as you will, either a friend or a husband, for my heart and my body are yours. I do not want you to answer me now. I do not wish to speak any more on the subject here. When we meet in Paris, you can tell me your decision." He uttered these words without glancing at her, and she seemed not to have heard them, for she stood by his side, motionless, staring vaguely and fixedly at the landscape before her, bathed in moonlight. At length she murmured, "It is rather chilly," and turned toward the bed. Duray followed her. They did not speak, but continued their watch. Toward midnight Georges fell asleep. At daybreak the nurse entered, and he started up. Both he and Mme. Forestier retired to their rooms to obtain some rest. At 11 o'clock they rose and lunched together, while through the open window was wafted the sweet, perfumed air of spring. After lunch, Mme. Forestier proposed that they take a turn in the garden. As they walked slowly along, she suddenly said, without turning her head toward him, in a low, grave voice, "Listen to me, my dear friend. I have already reflected upon what you proposed to me, and I cannot allow you to depart without a word of reply. I will, however, say neither yes nor no. We will wait, we will see, we will become better acquainted. You must think it well over too. Do not yield to an impulse. I mention this to you before even poor Charles is buried, because it is necessary, after what you have said to me, that you should know me as I am, in order not to cherish the hope you express to me any longer, if you are not a man who can understand and bear with me. Now listen carefully. Marriage to me is not a chain but an association. I must be free, entirely unfettered in all my actions, my coming and my going. I can tolerate neither control, jealousy, nor criticism as to my conduct. I pledge my word, however, never to compromise the name of the man I marry, nor to render him ridiculous in the eyes of the world. But that man must promise to look upon me as an equal, an ally, and not as an inferior, or as an obedient submissive wife. My ideas, I know, are not like those of other people, but I shall never change them. Do not answer me. It would be useless. We shall meet again and talk it all over later. Now take a walk. I shall return to him. Goodbye until tonight. He kissed her hand and left her without having uttered a word. That night they met at dinner. Directly after the meal, they sought their rooms, worn out with fatigue. Chapter 9. Georges Duray resumed his old habits. Installed in the cozy apartments on Rue de Constantinople, his relations with Mme. de Morel became quite conjugal. Mme. Forestier had not returned. She lingered at Cannes. He, however, received a letter from her announcing her return about the middle of April, but containing not a word as to their parting. He waited. He was resolved to employ every means to marry her if she seemed to hesitate. He had faith in his good fortune, in that power of attraction which he felt within him, a power so irresistible that all women yielded to it. At length, a short note admonished him that the decisive moment had arrived. I am in Paris. Come to see me. Madeleine Forestier. Nothing more. He received it at 9 o'clock. At 3 o'clock of the same day, he called at her house. She extended both hands to him with a sweet smile, and they gazed into each other's eyes for several seconds. Then she murmured, "How kind of you to come." He replied, "I should have come whensoever you bade me." They sat down. She inquired about the Walters, his associates, and the newspaper. "I miss that very much," said she. "I had become a journalist in spirit. I like the profession." She paused. He fancied he saw in her smile, in her voice, in her words, a kind of invitation, and although he had resolved not to hasten matters, he stammered, "Well, why do you not resume that profession under the name of Duray?" She became suddenly serious, and placing her hand on his arm, she said, "Do not let us speak of that yet." Divining that she would accept him, he fell upon his knees and passionately kissed her hands, saying, thank you, how I love you." She rose. She was very pale. Duray kissed her brow. When she had disengaged herself from his embrace, she said gravely, "Listen, my friend, I have not yet fully decided, but my answer may be yes. You must wait patiently, however, until I disclose the secret to you." He promised and left her, his heart overflowing with joy. He worked steadily, spent little, tried to save some money that he might not be without a sou at the time of his marriage, and became as miserly as he had once been prodigal. Summer glided by, then autumn, and no one suspected the tie existing between Duray and Mme. Forestier, for they seldom met in public. One evening, Madeleine said to him, "You have not yet told Mme. de Morel our plans." "No, my dear, as you wished them kept secret. I have not mentioned them to a soul." "Very well, there is plenty of time. I will tell the Walters." She turned away her head and continued, "If you wish, we can be married the beginning of May. I obey you in all things joyfully. The 10th of May which falls on Saturday, would please me, for it is my birthday. Very well, the 10th of May. Your parents live near Rouen, do they not? Yes, near Rouen at Cantalou. I am very anxious to see them. He hesitated, perplexed. But they are, then he added more firmly. My dear, they are plain country people, innkeepers, who strained every nerve to give me an education. I am not ashamed of them, but their simplicity, their rusticity might annoy you. She smiled sweetly. No, I will love them very much. We will visit them, I wish to. I, too, am the child of humble parents, but I lost mine. I have no one in the world. She held out her hand to him. But you. He was affected, conquered as he had never been by any woman. I have been thinking of something, said she, but it is difficult to explain. He asked, what is it? It is this. I am like all women. I have my weaknesses. I should like to bear a noble name. Can you not, on the occasion of our marriage, change your name somewhat? She blushed, as if she had proposed something indelicate. He replied simply, I have often thought of it, but it does not seem easy to me. Why not? He laughed. Because I am afraid I should be ridiculed. She shrugged her shoulders. Not at all, not at all. Everyone does it, and no one laughs. Separate your name in this way, Duroy. It sounds very well. He replied, no, that will not do. It is too common a proceeding. I have thought of assuming the name of my native place, first as a literary pseudonym, and then as my surname in conjunction with Duroy, which might later on, as you proposed, be separated. She asked, is your native place Cantalou? Yes. I do not like the termination. Could we not modify it? She took a pen and wrote down the names in order to study them. Suddenly she cried, now I have it, and held toward him a sheet of paper on which was written, MME, Duroy de Cantal. Gravely he replied, yes, it is very nice. She was delighted and repeated, Duroy de Cantal, MME, Duroy de Cantal. It is excellent, excellent. Then she added with an air of conviction, you will see how easily it will be accepted by everyone. After tomorrow, sign your articles de Cantal and your echoes simply Dur. That is done on the press every day, and no one will be surprised to see you take a nom de plume. What is your father's name? Alexander. She murmured, Alexander, 2 or 3 times in succession. Then she wrote upon a blank sheet, M and MME. Alexander Duroy de Cantal announced the marriage of their son, M. Georges Duroy de Cantal, with MME. Forestier. She examined her writing, and, charmed with the effect, exclaimed, with a little method one can succeed in anything. When Georges reached the street, resolved to call himself, henceforth, Duroy, or even Duroy de Cantal, it seemed to him that he was of more importance. He swaggered more boldly, held his head more erect, and walked as he thought gentlemen should. He felt a desire to inform the passers-by, my name is Duroy de Cantal. Scarcely had he entered his apartments when the thought of MME. De Morel rendered him uneasy, and he wrote to her immediately, appointing a meeting for the following day. It will be hard, thought he. There will be a quarrel, surely. The next morning he received a telegram from Madame, informing him that she would be with him at 1 o'clock. He awaited her impatiently, determined to confess at once and afterward to argue with her, to tell her that he could not remain a bachelor indefinitely, and that, as M. de Morel persisted in living, he had been compelled to choose someone else as a legal companion. When the bell rang, his heart gave a bound. Mme. de Morel entered and cast herself into his arms, saying, "Good afternoon, Bel-Ami." Perceiving that his embrace was colder than usual, she glanced up at him and asked, "What ails you?" "Take a seat," said he. "We must talk seriously." She seated herself without removing her hat and waited. He cast down his eyes. He was preparing to commence. Finally, he said slowly, "My dear friend, you see that I am very much perplexed, very sad, and very much embarrassed by what I have to confess to you. I love you. I love you with all my heart, and the fear of giving you pain grieves me more than what I have to tell you." She turned pale, trembled, and asked, "What is it? Tell me quickly." He said sadly, but resolutely, "I am going to be married." She sighed like one about to lose consciousness. Then she gasped, but did not speak. He continued, "You cannot imagine how much I suffered before taking that resolution. But I have neither position nor money. I am alone in Paris. I must have near me someone who can counsel, comfort, and support me. What I need is an associate, an ally, and I have found one." He paused, hoping that she would reply, expecting an outburst of furious rage, reproaches, and insults. She pressed her hand to her heart and breathed with difficulty. He took the hand resting on the arm of the chair, but she drew it away and murmured as if stupefied, "Oh, my God." He fell upon his knees before her, without, however, venturing to touch her, more moved by her silence than he would have been by her anger. "Chloe, my little Chloe, you understand my position. Oh, if I could have married you, what happiness it would have afforded me. But you were married. What could I do? Just think of it. I must make my way in the world, and I can never do so as long as I have no domestic ties. If you knew, there are days when I should like to kill your husband." He spoke in a low, seductive voice. He saw 2 tears gather in Mme. de Morel's eyes and trickle slowly down her cheeks. He whispered, "Do not weep, Chloe, do not weep, I beseech you. You break my heart." She made an effort to appear dignified and haughty, and asked, though somewhat unsteadily, "Who is it?" For a moment he hesitated before he replied, "Madeleine Forestier." Mme. de Morel started. Her tears continued to flow. She rose. Duray saw that she was going to leave him without a word of reproach or pardon, and he felt humbled, humiliated. He seized her gown and implored, "Do not leave me thus." She looked at him with that despairing, tearful glance so charming and so touching, which expresses all the misery pent up in a woman's heart, and stammered, "I have nothing to say. I can do nothing. You are right. You have made a good choice. And disengaging herself, she left the room. With a sigh of relief at escaping so easily, he repaired to Mme. Forestier S., who asked him, "Have you told Mme. de Morel?" He replied calmly, "Yes." Did it affect her? Not at all. On the contrary, she thought it an excellent plan. The news was soon noised abroad. Some were surprised, others pretended to have foreseen it, and others again smiled, inferring that they were not at all astonished. The young man who signed his articles, D. de Cantal, his echoes, Duroy, and his political sketches, Duroy, spent the best part of his time with his betrothed, who had decided that the date fixed for the wedding should be kept secret, that the ceremony should be celebrated in the presence of witnesses only, that they should leave the same evening for Rouen, and that the day following they should visit the journalist's aged parents and spend several days with them. Duroy had tried to persuade Madeleine to abandon that project, but not succeeding in his efforts, he was finally compelled to submit. The 10th of May arrived. Thinking a religious ceremony unnecessary, as they had issued no invitations, the couple were married at a magistrate S. and took the 6 o'clock train for Normandy. As the train glided along, Duroy, seated in front of his wife, took her hand, kissed it, and said, "When we return, we will dine at Chatou sometimes." She murmured, "We shall have a great many things to do," in a tone which seemed to say, "We must sacrifice pleasure to duty." He retained her hand, wondering anxiously how he could manage to caress her. He pressed her hands slightly, but she did not respond to the pressure. He said, "It seems strange that you should be my wife." She appeared surprised. "Why?" "I do not know. It seems droll. I want to embrace you, and I am surprised that I have the right." She calmly offered him her cheek, which he kissed, as he would have kissed his sister S. He continued, "The first time I saw you, you remember, at that dinner to which I was invited at Forestier's, I thought, sacristi, if I could only find a wife like that. And now I have one." She glanced at him with smiling eyes. He said to himself, "I am too cold, I am stupid, I should make more advances." And he asked, "How did you make Forestier's acquaintance?" She replied with provoking archness, "Are we going to Rouen to talk of him?" He colored. "I am a fool. You intimidate me." She was delighted. Impossible." He seated himself beside her. She exclaimed, "Ah, a stag." The train was passing through the forest of Saint Germain, and she had seen a frightened deer clear an alley at a bound. As she gazed out of the open window, Duray, bending over her, pressed a kiss upon her neck. For several moments she remained motionless. Then, raising her head, she said, "You tickle me, stop." But he did not obey her. She repeated, "Stop, I say." He seized her head with his right hand, turned it toward him, and pressed his lips to hers. She struggled, pushed him away, and repeated, "Stop." He did not heed her. With an effort, she freed herself and, rising, said, "Georges have done. We are not children. We shall soon reach Rouen." Very well, said he gaily. I will wait. Reseating herself near him, she talked of what they would do on their return. They would keep the apartments in which she had lived with her first husband, and Dore would receive Forestier's position on La Vie Francaise. In the meantime, forgetting her injunctions and his promise, he slipped his arm around her waist, pressed her to him, and murmured, I love you dearly, my little maid. The gentleness of his tone moved the young woman, and leaning toward him, she offered him her lips. As she did so, a whistle announced the proximity of the station. Pushing back some stray locks upon her temples, she exclaimed, We are foolish. He kissed her hands feverishly and replied, I adore you, my little maid. On reaching Rouen, they repaired to a hotel where they spent the night. The following morning, when they had drunk the tea placed upon the table in their room, Dure clasped his wife in his arms and said, My little maid, I feel that I love you very, very much. She smiled trustfully and murmured as she returned his kisses, I love you too, a little. The visit to his parents worried Georges, although he had prepared his wife. He began again. You know they are peasants, real, not sham, Kamakapura peasants. She smiled. I know it, you have told me often enough. We shall be very uncomfortable. There is only a straw bed in my room. They do not know what hair mattresses are at Cantalou. She seemed delighted. So much the better. It would be charming to sleep badly when near you and to be awakened by the crowing of the cocks. He walked toward the window and lighted a cigarette. The sight of the harbor, of the river filled with ships, moved him, and he exclaimed, Egad, but that is fine. Madeline joined him, and placing both of her hands on her husband's shoulder, cried, Oh, how beautiful! I did not know that there were so many ships. An hour later they departed in order to breakfast with the old couple, who had been informed several days before of their intended arrival. Both Dure and his wife were charmed with the beauties of the landscape presented to their view, and the cabman halted in order to allow them to get a better idea of the panorama before them. As he whipped up his horse, Dure saw an old couple not 100 meters off, approaching, and he leaped from the carriage crying, Here they are, I know them. The man was short, corpulent, florid, and vigorous. Notwithstanding his age, the woman was tall, thin, and melancholy, with stooping shoulders, a woman who had worked from childhood, who had never laughed nor jested. Madeline, too, alighted and watched the couple advance, with a contraction of her heart she had not anticipated. They did not recognize their son in that fine gentleman, and they would never have taken that handsome lady for their daughter-in-law. They walked along, past the child they were expecting, without glancing at the city folks. Georges cried with a laugh, Good day, Father Dure. Both the old man and his wife were struck dumb with astonishment. The latter recovered her self-possession first and asked, Is it you, son? The young man replied, Yes, it is I, Mother Dure, and approaching her, he kissed her upon both cheeks and said, This is my wife. The two rustics stared at Madeline, as if she were a curiosity with anxious fear, combined with a sort of satisfied approbation on the part of the father, and of jealous enmity on that of the mother. M. Duroy, Sr., who was naturally jocose, made so bold as to ask with a twinkle in his eye, "May I kiss you too?" His son uttered an exclamation, and Madeline offered her cheek to the old peasant, who afterward wiped his lips with the back of his hand. The old woman, in her turn, kissed her daughter-in-law with hostile reserve. Her ideal was a stout, rosy country lass, as red as an apple and as round. The carriage preceded them with the luggage. The old man took his son's arm and asked him, "How are you getting on?" "Very well." "That is right. Tell me, has your wife any means?" Georges replied, 40,000 francs. His father whistled softly and muttered, "Hugh." Then he added, "She is a handsome woman." He admired his son's wife, and in his day had considered himself a connoisseur. Madeline and the mother walked side by side in silence. The two men joined them. They soon reached the village, at the entrance to which stood M. Duroy's tavern. A pine board fastened over the door indicated that thirsty people might enter. The table was laid. A neighbor, who had come to assist, made a low courtesy on seeing so beautiful a lady appear. Then, recognizing Georges, she cried, "Oh Lord, is it you?" He replied merrily, "Yes, it is I, Mother Brulin," and he kissed her as he had kissed his father and mother. Then he turned to his wife. "Come into our room," said he. "You can lay aside your hat." They passed through a door to the right and entered a room paved with brick, with whitewashed walls and a bed with cotton hangings, a crucifix above a holy water basin, and two colored prints representing Paul and Virginia beneath a blue palm tree, and Napoleon I on a yellow horse, were the only ornaments in that neat but bare room. When they were alone, Georges embraced Madeline. "Good morning, maid. I am glad to see the old people once more. When one is in Paris, one does not think of this place, but when one returns, one enjoys it just the same." At that moment, his father cried, knocking on the partition with his fist, "Come, the soup is ready." They re-entered the large public room and took their seats at the table. The meal was a long one, served in a truly rustic fashion. Father Duroy, enlivened by the cider and several glasses of wine, related many anecdotes, while Georges, to whom they were all familiar, laughed at them. Mother Duroy did not speak, but sat at the board, grim and austere, glancing at her daughter-in-law with hatred in her heart. Madeline did not speak, nor did she eat. She was depressed. Wherefore, she had wished to come. She knew that she was coming to a simple home. She had formed no poetical ideas of those peasants, but she had perhaps expected to find them somewhat more polished, refined. She recalled her own mother, of whom she never spoke to anyone, a governess who had been betrayed, and who had died of grief and shame when Madeline was 12 years old. A stranger had had the little girl educated. Her father, without doubt. Who was he? She did not know positively, but she had vague suspicions. The meal was not yet over when customers entered, shook hands with M. Duroy, exclaimed on seeing his son, and seating themselves at the wooden tables began to drink, smoke, and play dominoes. The smoke from the clay pipes and penny cigars filled the room. Madeline choked and asked, "Can we go out? I cannot remain here any longer." Old Duroy grumbled at being disturbed. Madeline rose and placed her chair at the door in order to wait until her father-in-law and his wife had finished their coffee and wine. Georges soon joined her. "Would you like to stroll down to the Seine?" Joyfully she cried, "Yes." They descended the hillside, hired a boat at Croisset, and spent the remainder of the afternoon beneath the willows in the soft, warm spring air, and rocked gently by the rippling waves of the river. They returned at nightfall. The evening repast by candlelight was more painful to Madeline than that of the morning. Neither Father Duroy nor his wife spoke. When the meal was over, Madeline drew her husband outside in order not to have to remain in that room, the atmosphere of which was heavy with smoke and the fumes of liquor. When they were alone, he said, "You are already weary." She attempted to protest. He interrupted her. "I have seen it. If you wish, we will leave tomorrow." She whispered, "I should like to go." They walked along and entered a narrow path among high trees, hedged in on either side by impenetrable brushwood. She asked, "Where are we?" He replied, "In the forest, one of the largest in France." Madeline, on raising her head, could see the stars between the branches and hear the rustling of the leaves. She felt strangely nervous. Why, she could not tell. She seemed to be lost, surrounded by perils, abandoned, alone, beneath that vast vaulted sky. She murmured, "I am afraid. I should like to return." "Very well, we will." On their return, they found the old people in bed. The next morning, Madeline rose early and was ready to leave at daybreak. When Georges told his parents that they were going to return home, they guessed whose wish it was. His father asked simply, "Shall I see you soon again?" "Yes, in the summertime." "Very well." His mother grumbled, "I hope you will not regret what you have done." Georges gave them 200 francs to appease them, and the cab arriving at 10 o'clock, the couple kissed the old peasants and set out. As they were descending the side of the hill, Duroy laughed. "You see," said he, "I warned you. I should, however, not have presented you to M and Mimi. Duroy de Cantal, Senior." She laughed too and replied, "I am charmed now. They are nice people whom I am beginning to like very much. I shall send them confections from Paris." Then she murmured, "Duroy de Cantal. We will say that we spent a week at your parents' estate," and drawing near him, she kissed him, saying, "Good morning, Georges." He replied, "Good morning, Madeline," as he slipped his arm around her waist. Chapter 10. The Duroys had been in Paris 2 days, and the journalist had resumed work. He had given up his own especial province to assume that of forestier, and to devote himself entirely to politics. On this particular evening, he turned his steps toward home with a light heart. As he passed a florist's on Rue Notre Dame de Lorette, he bought a bouquet of half-open roses for Madeline. Having forgotten his key, on arriving at his door, he rang, and the servant answered his summons. Georges asked, "Is Madame at home?" "Yes, sir." In the dining room, he paused in astonishment to see covers laid for three. The door of the salon being ajar, he saw Madeline arranging in a vase on the mantelpiece a bunch of roses similar to his. He entered the room and asked, "Have you invited anyone to dinner?" She replied without turning her head and continuing the arrangement of her flowers. "Yes and no. It is my old friend, Count de Vaudrec, who is in the habit of dining here every Monday, and who will come now, as he always has." Georges murmured, "Very well." He stopped behind her, the bouquet in his hand, the desire strong within him to conceal it, to throw it away. "However," he said, "here I have brought you some roses." She turned to him with a smile and said, "Ah, how thoughtful of you." And she kissed him with such evident affection that he felt consoled. She took the flowers, inhaled their perfume, and put them in an empty vase. Then she said, as she noted the effect, "Now I am satisfied my mantelpiece looks pretty," adding with an air of conviction, "Vaudrec is charming. You will become intimate with him at once." A ring announced the Count. He entered as if he were at home. After gallantly kissing Mimi Duroy's hand, he turned to her husband and cordially offered his hand, saying, "How are you, my dear Duroy?" He had no longer that haughty air, but was very affable. One would have thought in the course of 5 minutes that the two men had known one another for 10 years. Madeline, whose face was radiant, said, "I will leave you together. I have work to superintend in the kitchen." The dinner was excellent, and the Count remained very late. When he was gone, Madeline said to her husband, "Is he not nice? He improves, too, on acquaintance. He is a good, true, faithful friend. Ah, without him." She did not complete her sentence, and Georges replied, "Yes, he is very pleasant. I think we shall understand each other well. You do not know," she said, "that we have work to do tonight before retiring. I did not have time to tell you before dinner, for Vaudrec came. Larache Matthew brought me important news of Morocco. We must make a fine article of that. Let us set to work at once. Come, take the lamp." He carried the lamp, and they entered the study. Madeline leaned against the mantelpiece, and having lighted a cigarette, told him the news and gave him her plan of the article. He listened attentively, making notes as she spoke, and when she had finished, he raised objections, took up the question, and, in his turn, developed another plan. His wife ceased smoking, for her interest was aroused in following George's line of thought. From time to time she murmured, "Yes, yes, very good, excellent, very forcible." And when he had finished speaking, she said, "Now let us write." It was always difficult for him to make a beginning, and she would lean over his shoulder and whisper the phrases in his ear. Then he would add a few lines. When their article was completed, Georges reread it. Both he and Madeline pronounced it admirable, and kissed one another with passionate admiration. The article appeared with the signature of G. Du Roy de Cantal, and made a great sensation. M. Walter congratulated the author, who soon became celebrated in political circles. His wife, too, surprised him by the ingenuousness of her mind, the cleverness of her wit, and the number of her acquaintances. At almost any time upon returning home, he found in his salon a senator, a deputy, a magistrate, or a general, who treated Madeline with grave familiarity. Deputy Laroche Matthew, who dined at Rue Fontaine every Tuesday, was one of the largest stockholders of M. Walter's paper, and the latter's colleague and associate in many business transactions. Du Roy hoped, later on, that some of the benefits promised by him to Forestier might fall to his share. They would be given to Madeline's new husband. That was all. Nothing was changed. Even his associates sometimes called him Forestier, and it made Du Roy furious at the dead. He grew to hate the very name. It was to him almost an insult. Even at home, the obsession continued. The entire house reminded him of Charles. One evening Du Roy, who liked sweetmeats, asked, "Why do we never have sweets?" His wife replied pleasantly, "I never think of it, because Charles disliked them." He interrupted her with an impatient gesture. "Do you know I am getting tired of Charles? It is Charles here, Charles there, Charles like this, Charles like that. Since Charles is dead, let him rest in peace." Madeline ascribed her husband's burst of ill humor to puerile jealousy, but she was flattered and did not reply. On retiring, haunted by the same thought, he asked, "Did Charles wear a cotton nightcap to keep the draught out of his ears?" She replied pleasantly, "No, a lace one." Georges shrugged his shoulders and said scornfully, "What a bird." From that time, Georges never called Charles anything but poor Charles, with an accent of infinite pity. One evening, as Du Roy was smoking a cigarette at his window, toward the end of June, the heat awoke in him a desire for fresh air. He asked, "My little maid, would you like to go as far as the boys?" "Yes, certainly." They took an open carriage and drove to the Avenue du Bois de Boulogne. It was a sultry evening. A host of cabs lined the drive, one behind another. When the carriage containing Georges and Madeline reached the turning which led to the fortifications, they kissed one another, and Madeline stammered in confusion, "We are as childish as we were at Rouen." The road they followed was not so much frequented. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. The sky was studded with brilliant stars, and Georges murmured, as he pressed his wife to his breast, "Oh, my little maid," she said to him, "do you remember how gloomy the forest at Cantalou was? It seemed to me that it was full of horrible beasts, and that it was interminable, while here it is charming. One can feel the caressing breezes, and I know that Sevres is on the other side." He replied, "In our forests there are nothing but stags, foxes, roebucks, and boars, with here and there a forester's house." He paused for a moment and then asked, "Did you come here in the evening with Charles occasionally?" She replied, "Frequently." He felt a desire to return home at once. Forestier's image haunted him, however. He could think of nothing else. The carriage rolled on toward the Arc de Triomphe and joined the stream of carriages returning home. As Georges remained silent, his wife, who divined his thoughts, asked in her soft voice, "Of what are you thinking? For half an hour you have not uttered a word." He replied with a sneer, "I am thinking of all those fools who kiss one another, and I believe truly that there is something else to be done in life." She whispered, "Yes, but it is nice sometimes. It is nice when one has nothing better to do." George's thoughts were busy with the dead. He said to himself angrily, "I am foolish to worry, to torment myself as I have done." After remonstrating thus with himself, he felt more reconciled to the thought of Forestier, and felt like exclaiming, "Good evening, old fellow." Madeline, who was bored by his silence, asked, "Shall we go to Tortoni S for ices before returning home?" He glanced at her from his corner and thought, "She is pretty, so much the better. Tit for tat, my comrade. But if they begin again to annoy me with you, it will get somewhat hot at the North Pole." Then he replied, "Certainly, my darling." And before she had time to think, he kissed her. It seemed to Madeline that her husband's lips were icy. However, he smiled as usual and gave her his hand to assist her to alight at the cafe. Chapter 11. On entering the office the following day, Duroy sought Boisrenard and told him to warn his associates not to continue the farce of calling him Forestier, or there would be war. When Duroy returned an hour later, no one called him by that name. From the office, he proceeded to his home, and hearing the sound of ladies' voices in the drawing room, he asked the servant, "Who is here?" "Madame Walter and Madame de Morel," was the reply. His heart pulsated violently as he opened the door. Clotilde was seated by the fireplace. It seemed to Georges that she turned pale on perceiving him. Having greeted Madame Walter and her two daughters seated like sentinels beside her, he turned to his former mistress. She extended her hand. He took and pressed it as if to say, "I love you still." She returned the pressure. He said, "Have you been well since we last met?" "Yes, have you, Bellamy?" And turning to Madeline, she added, "Will you permit me to call him Bellamy?" "Certainly, my dear. I will permit anything you wish." A shade of irony lurked beneath those words, uttered so pleasantly. Madame Walter mentioned a fencing match to be given at Jacques Rival's apartments, the proceeds to be devoted to charities, and in which many society ladies were going to assist. She said, "It will be very entertaining, but I am in despair, for we have no one to escort us, my husband having an engagement." Duroy offered his services at once. She accepted, saying, "My daughters and I shall be very grateful." He glanced at the younger of the two girls and thought, "Little Suzanne is not at all bad, not at all." She resembled a doll, being very small and dainty, with a well-proportioned form, a pretty, delicate face blue-gray eyes, a fair skin, and curly, flaxen hair. Her elder sister, Rose, was plain one of those girls to whom no attention is ever paid. Her mother rose, and turning to George's, said, "I shall count on you next Thursday at 2 o'clock." He replied, "Count upon me, madame." When the door closed upon Madame, Walter, Madame, de Morel in her turn rose. "Au revoir, bel ami." This time she pressed his hand, and he was moved by that silent avowal. "I will go to see her tomorrow," thought he. Left alone with his wife, she laughed, and looking into his eyes said, "MME. Walter has taken a fancy to you." He replied incredulously, "Nonsense. But I know it. She spoke of you to me with great enthusiasm. She said she would like to find 2 husbands like you for her daughters. Fortunately, she is not susceptible herself." He did not understand her and repeated, "Susceptible herself." She replied in a tone of conviction, "Oh, madame, Walter is irreproachable. Her husband you know as well as I, but she is different. Still, she has suffered a great deal in having married a Jew. Though she has been true to him, she is a virtuous woman." Duroy was surprised. "I thought her a Jewess." "She a Jewess? No, indeed. She is the prime mover in all the charitable movements at the Madeleine. She was even married by a priest. I am not sure, but that Madame Walter went through the form of baptism." Georges murmured, "And she likes me." "Yes. If you were not married, I should advise you to ask for the hand of Suzanne. Would you not prefer her to Rose?" He replied as he twisted his mustache, "The mother is not so bad." Madeleine replied, "I am not afraid of her. At her age one does not begin to make conquests. One should commence sooner." Georges thought, "If I might have had Suzanne, ah." Then he shrugged his shoulders. "Bah, it is absurd. Her father would not have consented." He determined to treat Madame Walter very considerately in order to retain her regard. All that evening he was haunted by recollections of his love for Clotilde. He recalled their escapades, her kindness. He repeated to himself, "She is indeed nice. Yes, I shall call upon her tomorrow." When he had lunched the following morning, he repaired to Rue Verneuil. The same maid opened the door, and with the familiarity of an old servant, she asked, "Is Monsieur well?" He replied, "Yes, my child," and entered the drawing room in which someone was practicing scales. It was Laurine. He expected she would fall upon his neck. She, however, rose ceremoniously, bowed coldly, and left the room with dignity. Her manner was so much like that of an outraged woman that he was amazed. Her mother entered. He kissed her hand. "How much I have thought of you," said he. "And I of you," she replied. They seated themselves and smiled as they gazed into one another's eyes. "My dear little Clo, I love you. And I love you. Still, you did not miss me." "Yes and no. I was grieved, but when I heard your reason, I said to myself, 'Bah, he will return to me some day.' I dared not come. I did not know how I should be received. I dared not, but I longed to come. Now, tell me what ails Laurine. She scarcely bade me good morning, and left the room with an angry air. I do not know, but one cannot mention you to her since your marriage. I really believe she is jealous. Nonsense. Yes, my dear, she no longer calls you Bellamy, but Madame Forestier instead. Duroy colored, then drawing nearer the young woman, he said, "Kiss me." She obeyed him. "Where can we meet again?" he asked. "At Rue de Constantinople." "Ah, are the apartments not rented?" "No, I kept them." "You did?" "Yes, I thought you would return." His heart bounded joyfully. She loved him then with a lasting love. He whispered, "I adore you." Then he asked, "Is your husband well?" "Yes, very well. He has just been home for a month. He went away the day before yesterday." Duroy could not suppress a smile. "How opportunely that always happens." She replied naively, "Yes, it happens opportunely, but he is not in the way when he is here, is he?" "That is true. He is a charming man. How do you like your new life?" "Tolerably. My wife is a comrade, an associate, nothing more. As for my heart, I understand, but she is good." "Yes, she does not trouble me." He drew near Clotilde and murmured, "When shall we meet again?" "Tomorrow, if you will." "Yes, tomorrow at 2 o'clock." He rose to take his leave, somewhat embarrassed. "You know, I intend to take back the rooms on Rue de Constantinople myself." "I wish to." "It is not necessary for you to pay for them." She kissed his hands, saying, "You may do as you like. I am satisfied to have kept them until we met again." And Duroy took his leave very well satisfied. When Thursday came, he asked Madeline, "Are going to the fencing match at rival S?" "No, I do not care about it." "I will go to the Chamber of Deputies." Georges called for Madame Walter in an open carriage, for the weather was delightful. He was surprised to find her looking so handsome and so young. Never had she appeared so fresh. Her daughter, Suzanne, was dressed in pink. Her sister looked like her governess. At Rival's door was a long line of carriages. Duroy offered his arm to Mme. Walter, and they entered. The entertainment was for the benefit of the orphans of the 6th Ward, under the patronage of all the wiles of the senators and deputies who were connected with La Vie Francaise. Jacques Rival received the arrivals at the entrance to his apartments. Then he pointed to a small staircase which led to the cellar, in which were his shooting gallery and fencing room, saying, "Downstairs, ladies, downstairs. The match will take place in the subterranean apartments." Pressing Duroy's hand, he said, "Good evening, Bellamy." Duroy was surprised. "Who told you about that name?" Rival replied, "Mme. Walter, who thinks it very pretty." Madame Walter blushed. "Yes, I confess that if I knew you better, I should do as little Laurine, and I should call you Bellamy too. It suits you admirably." Duroy laughed. "I beg you to do so, madame." She cast down her eyes. "No, we are not well enough acquainted." He murmured, "Permit me to hope that we shall become so." "Well, we shall see," said she. They descended the stairs. and entered a large room which was lighted by Venetian lanterns and decorated with festoons of gauze. Nearly all the benches were filled with ladies who were chatting as if they were at a theater. Madame Walter and her daughters reached their seats in the front row. Du Roy, having obtained their places for them, whispered, "I shall be obliged to leave you. Men cannot occupy the seats." Madame Walter replied hesitatingly, "I should like to keep you just the same. You could tell me the names of the participants. See, if you stand at the end of the seat, you will not annoy anyone." She raised her large, soft eyes to his and insisted, "Come, stay with us, Bellamy, we need you." He replied, "I obey with pleasure, madame." Suddenly, Jacques Rival's voice announced, "We will begin, ladies." Then followed the fencing match. Du Roy retained his place beside the ladies and gave them all the necessary information. When the entertainment was over and all expenses were paid, 220 francs remained for the orphans of the 6th Ward. Du Roy, escorting the Walters, awaited his carriage. When seated face to face with Madame Walter, he met her troubled but caressing glance. "Egad, I believe she is affected," thought he, and he smiled as he recognized the fact that he was really successful with the female sex, for Mme. de Morel, since the renewal of their relations, seemed to love him madly. With a light heart, he returned home. Madeline was awaiting him in the drawing room. "I have some news," said she. "The affair with Morocco is becoming complicated. France may send an expedition out there in several months. In any case, the ministry will be overthrown, and Laroche will profit by the occasion." Du Roy, in order to draw out his wife, pretended not to believe it. France would not be silly enough to commence any folly with Tunis. She shrugged her shoulders impatiently. "I tell you she will. You do not understand that it is a question of money. You are as simple as Forestier." Her object was to wound and irritate him, but he only smiled and replied, "What? As simple as that stupid fellow?" She ceased and murmured, "Oh, Georges." He added, "Poor devil," in a tone of profound pity. Madeline turned her back upon him scornfully. After a moment of silence, she continued, "We shall have some company Tuesday. Madame Laroche Mathieu is coming here to dine with Viscountess de Percimer. Will you invite Rival and Norbert de Varenne? I shall go to Madame's. Walter and de Morel tomorrow. Perhaps, too, we may have Mme. Rissolin." Du Roy replied, "Very well, I will see to Rival and Norbert." The following day, he thought he would anticipate his wife's visit to Madame Walter and attempt to find out if she really was in love with him. He arrived at Boulevard Malesherbes at 2 o'clock. He was ushered into the salon and waited. Finally, Madame Walter appeared and offered him her hand cordially. "What good wind blows you here?" "No good wind, but a desire to see you. Some power has impelled me hither. I do not know why. I have nothing to say except that I have come. Here I am. Pardon the morning call and the candor of my explanation. He uttered those words with a smile upon his lips and a serious accent in his voice. In her astonishment, she stammered with a blush. "But indeed, I do not understand. You surprise me." He added, "It is a declaration made in jest in order not to startle you." They were seated near each other. She took the matter as a jest. "Is it a declaration, seriously?" "Yes, for a long time I have wished to make it, but I dared not. They say you are so austere, so rigid." She had recovered her self-possession and replied, "Why did you choose today?" "I do not know." Then he lowered his voice, "Or rather because I have thought only of you since yesterday." Suddenly turning pale, she gasped, "Come, enough of this childishness. Let us talk of something else." But he fell upon his knees before her. She tried to rise. He prevented her by twining his arms about her waist and repeated in a passionate voice, "Yes, it is true that I have loved you madly for some time. Do not answer me. I am mad. I love you. Oh, if you knew how I love you." She could utter no sound. In her agitation, she repulsed him with both hands, for she could feel his breath upon her cheek. He rose suddenly and attempted to embrace her, but gaining her liberty for a moment, she escaped him and ran from chair to chair. He, considering such pursuit beneath his dignity, sank into a chair, buried his face in his hands, and feigned to sob convulsively. Then he rose, cried, "Adieu, adieu," and fled. In the hall, he took his cane calmly and left the house saying, "Christie, I believe she loves me." He went at once to the telegraph office to send a message to Clotilde, appointing a rendezvous for the next day. On entering the house at his usual time, he said to his wife, "Well, is everyone coming to dinner?" She replied, "Yes, all but Madame Walter, who is uncertain as to whether she can come. She acted very strangely. Never mind, perhaps she can manage it anyway." He replied, "She will come." He was not, however, certain, and was rendered uneasy until the day of the dinner. That morning, Madeline received a message from Madame Walter to this effect: "I have succeeded in arranging matters, and I shall be with you, but my husband cannot accompany me." Duroy thought, "I did right not to return there. She has calmed down." Still, he awaited her arrival anxiously. She appeared very composed, somewhat reserved and haughty. He was very humble, very careful, and submissive. Mesdames Larach Mathieu and Risselin were accompanied by their husbands. Madame de Morel looked bewitching in an odd combination of yellow and black. At Duroy's right sat Madame Walter, and he spoke to her only of serious matters with exaggerated respect. From time to time, he glanced at Clotilde. "She is really very pretty and fresh-looking," thought he. But Madame Walter attracted him by the difficulty of the conquest. She took her leave early. "I will escort you," said he. She declined his offer. He insisted, "Why do you not want me? You wound me deeply. Do not let me feel that I am not forgiven. You see that I am calm." She replied, "You cannot leave your guests thus. He smiled. Bah, I shall be absent 20 minutes. No one will even notice it. If you refuse me, you will break my heart. Very well, she whispered. I will accept. When they were seated in the carriage, he seized her hand and, kissing it, passionately said, I love you, I love you. Let me tell it to you. I will not touch you. I only wish to repeat that I love you. She stammered. After what you promised me, it is too bad, too bad. He seemed to make a great effort. Then he continued in a subdued voice. See how I can control myself. And yet, let me only tell you this. I love you, yes. Let me go home with you and kneel before you 5 minutes to utter those 3 words and gaze upon your beloved face. She suffered him to take her hand and replied in broken accents, No, I cannot. I do not wish to. Think of what my servants, my daughters, would say. No, no, it is impossible. He continued, I cannot live without seeing you, whether it be at your house or elsewhere. I must see you for only a moment each day, that I may touch your hand, breathe the air stirred by your gown, contemplate the outlines of your form, and see your beautiful eyes. She listened tremblingly to the musical language of love and made answer, No, it is impossible. Be silent. He spoke very low. He whispered in her ear, comprehending that it was necessary to win that simple woman gradually, to persuade her to appoint a meeting where she willed at first, and later on where he willed. Listen, I must see you. I will wait at your door like a beggar. If you do not come down, I will come to you, but I shall see you tomorrow. She repeated, No, do not come. I shall not receive you. Think of my daughters. Then tell me where I can meet you in the street. It matters not where, at any hour you wish, provided that I can see you. I will greet you. I will say, I love you, and then go away. She hesitated, almost distracted. As the coupe stopped at the door, she whispered hastily, I will be at La Trinite tomorrow at 3:30. After alighting, she said to her coachman, Take Madame Duroy home. When he returned, his wife asked, Where have you been? He replied in a low voice, I have been to send an important telegram. MME. De Morel approached him. You must take me home, Bellamy. You know that I only dine so far from home on that condition. Turning to Madeline, she asked, You are not jealous? Madame Duroy replied slowly, No, not at all. The guests departed. Clotilde, enveloped in laces, whispered to Madeline at the door, Your dinner was perfect. In a short while, you will have the best political salon in Paris. When she was alone with Georges, she said, Oh, my darling Bellamy, I love you more dearly every day. The cab rolled on, and George's thoughts were with Madame Walter. Chapter 12. The July sun shone upon the Place de la Trinite, which was almost deserted. Duroy drew out his watch. It was only 3 o'clock. He was half an hour too early. He laughed as he thought of the place of meeting. He entered the sacred edifice of La Trinite. The coolness within was refreshing. Here and there an old woman kneeled at prayer, her face in her hands. Duroy looked at his watch again. It was not yet 3:15. He took a seat, regretting that he could not smoke. At the end of the church near the choir, he could hear the measured tread of a corpulent man whom he had noticed when he entered. Suddenly, the rustle of a gown made him start. It was she. He arose and advanced quickly. She did not offer him her hand and whispered, "I have only a few minutes. You must kneel near me that no one will notice us." She proceeded to a side aisle after saluting the host on the high altar, took a footstool, and kneeled down. Georges took one beside it, and when they were in the attitude of prayer, he said, "Thank you, thank you. I adore you. I should like to tell you constantly how I began to love you, how I was conquered the first time I saw you. Will you permit me some day to unburden my heart, to explain all to you?" She replied between her fingers, "I am mad to let you speak to me thus, mad to have come hither, mad to do as I have done, to let you believe that this adventure can have any results. Forget it, and never speak to me of it again." She paused. He replied, "I expect nothing, I hope nothing. I love you whatever you may do. I will repeat it so often, with so much force and ardor, that you will finally understand me and reply, 'I love you too.'" He felt her frame tremble as she involuntarily repeated, "I love you too." He was overcome by astonishment. "Oh my God," she continued incoherently, "should I say that to you? I feel guilty, despicable, I who have 2 daughters. But I cannot, I never thought it was stronger than I. Listen. I have never loved any other. But you, I swear it. I have loved you a year in secret. I have suffered and struggled. I can no longer. I love you." She wept, and her bowed form was shaken by the violence of her emotion. Georges murmured, "Give me your hand that I may touch, may press it." She slowly took her hand from her face. He seized it, saying, "I should like to drink your tears." Placing the hand he held upon his heart, he asked, "Do you feel it beat?" In a few moments, the man Georges had noticed before passed by them. When Madame Walter heard him near her, she snatched her fingers from George's clasp and covered her face with them. After the man had disappeared, Duroy asked, hoping for another place of meeting than La Trinite, "Where shall I see you tomorrow?" She did not reply. She seemed transformed into a statue of prayer. He continued, "Shall I meet you tomorrow at Park Monceau?" She turned a livid face toward him and said unsteadily, leave me now, go away for only 5 minutes. I suffer too much near you. I want to pray, go. Let me pray alone, 5 minutes. Let me ask God to pardon me, to save me, leave me, 5 minutes. She looked so pitiful that he rose without a word and asked with some hesitation, "Shall I return presently?" She nodded her head in the affirmative, and he left her. She tried to pray. She closed her eyes in order not to see Georges. She could not pray. She could only think of him. She would rather have died than have fallen thus. She had never been weak. She murmured several words of supplication. She knew that all was over, that the struggle was in vain. She did not, however, wish to yield, but she felt her weakness. Someone approached with a rapid step. She turned her head. It was a priest. She rose, ran toward him, and clasping her hands, she cried, "Save me, save me." He stopped in surprise. "What do you want, madame?" "I want you to save me. Have pity on me. If you do not help me, I am lost." He gazed at her, wondering if she were mad. "What can I do for you?" The priest was a young man, somewhat inclined to corpulence. "Receive my confession," said she, "and counsel me, sustain me, tell me what to do." He replied, "I confess every Saturday from 3 to 6. Seizing his arm, she repeated, "No, now, at once, at once. It is necessary. He is here, in this church. He is waiting for me." The priest asked, "Who is waiting for you?" "A man who will be my ruin if you do not save me. I can no longer escape him. I am too weak, too weak." She fell upon her knees, sobbing, "Oh, Father, have pity upon me. Save me, for God's sake, save me." She seized his gown that he might not escape her, while he uneasily glanced around on all sides to see if anyone noticed the woman at his feet. Finally, seeing that he could not free himself from her, he said, "Rise. I have the key to the confessional with me." Duroy, having walked around the choir, was sauntering down the nave when he met the stout, bold man wandering about, and he wondered, "What can he be doing here?" The man slackened his pace and looked at George's with the evident desire to speak to him. When he was near him, he bowed and said politely, "I beg your pardon, sir, for disturbing you, but can you tell me when this church was built?" Duroy replied, "I do not know. I think it is 20 or 25 years. It is the first time I have been here. I have never seen it before." Feeling interested in the stranger, the journalist continued, "It seems to me that you are examining into it very carefully." The man replied, "I am not visiting the church. I have an appointment." He paused and in a few moments added, "It is very warm outside." Duroy looked at him and suddenly thought that he resembled Forestier. "Are you from the provinces?" he asked. "Yes, I am from Rennes." "And did you, sir, enter this church from curiosity?" "No, I am waiting for a lady." And with a smile upon his lips, he walked away. He did not find Emily, Walter, in the place in which he had left her, and was surprised. She had gone. He was furious. Then he thought she might be looking for him, and he walked around the church. Not finding her, he returned and seated himself on the chair she had occupied, hoping that she would rejoin him there. Soon he heard the sound of a voice. He saw no one whence came it. He rose to examine into it, and saw in a chapel nearby the doors of the confessionals. He drew nearer in order to see the woman whose voice he heard. He recognized Emily. Walter, she was confessing. At first, he felt a desire to seize her by the arm and drag her away. Then he seated himself nearby and bided his time. He waited quite a while. At length, Emily. Walter rose, turned, saw him, and came toward him. Her face was cold and severe. "Sir," said she, "I beseech you not to accompany me, not to follow me, and not to come to my house alone. You will not be admitted. Adieu." And she walked away in a dignified manner. He permitted her to go, because it was against his principles to force matters. As the priest in his turn issued from the confessional, he advanced toward him and said, "If you did not wear a gown, I would give you a sound thrashing." Then he turned upon his heel and left the church whistling. In the doorway, he met the stout gentleman. When Du Roy passed him, they bowed. The journalist then repaired to the office of La Vie Francaise. As he entered, he saw by the clerk's busy air that something of importance was going on, and he hastened to the manager's room. The latter exclaimed joyfully as Du Roy entered, "What luck! Here is Bellamy." He stopped in confusion and apologized. "I beg your pardon. I am very much bothered by circumstances. And then I hear my wife and daughter call you Bellamy from morning until night, and I have acquired the habit myself. Are you displeased?" Georges laughed. "Not at all." Madame Walter continued, "Very well, then I will call you Bellamy, as everyone else does. Great changes have taken place. The ministry has been overthrown. Marat is to form a new cabinet. He has chosen General Boughton Dacre as Minister of War, and our friend Laroche Mathieu as Minister of Foreign Affairs. We shall be very busy. I must write a leading article, a simple declaration of principles. Then I must have something interesting on the Morocco question. You must attend to that." Du Roy reflected a moment and then replied, "I have it. I will give you an article on the political situation of our African colony." And he proceeded to prepare Madame Walter an outline of his work, which was nothing but a modification of his first article on Souvenirs of a Soldier in Africa. The manager, having read the article, said, "It is perfect. You are a treasure. Many thanks." Du Roy returned home to dinner delighted with his day, notwithstanding his failure at La Trinite. His wife was awaiting him anxiously. She exclaimed on seeing him, "You know that Laroche is Minister of Foreign Affairs." "Yes, I have just written an article on that subject." "How? Do you remember the first article we wrote on Souvenirs of a Soldier in Africa? Well, I revised and corrected it for the occasion." She smiled. "Ah, yes, that will do very well." At that moment, the servant entered with a dispatch containing these words, without any signature. I was beside myself. "Pardon me, and come tomorrow at 4 o'clock to Park Monceau." He understood the message, and with a joyful heart slipped the telegram into his pocket. During dinner, he repeated the words to himself. As he interpreted them, they meant, "I yield, I am yours where and when you will." He laughed. Madeline asked, "What is it?" "Nothing much. I was thinking of a comical old priest I met a short while since." Du Roy arrived at the appointed hour the following day. The benches were all occupied by people trying to escape from the heat, and by nurses with their charges. He found Madame Walter in a little antique ruin. She seemed unhappy and anxious. When he had greeted her, she said, "How many people there are in the garden?" He took advantage of the occasion. "Yes, that is true. Shall we go somewhere else?" "Where?" It matters not where for a drive, for instance. You can lower the shade on your side, and you will be well concealed. Yes, I should like that better. I shall die of fear here. Very well, meet me in 5 minutes at the gate, which opens on the boulevard. I will fetch a cab. When they were seated in the cab, she asked, "Where did you tell the coachman to drive to?" Georges replied, "Do not worry, he knows." He had given the man his address on the Rue de Constantinople. Madame Walter said to Duroy, "You cannot imagine how I suffer on your account, how I am tormented, tortured. Yesterday I was harsh, but I wanted to escape you at any price. I was afraid to remain alone with you. Have you forgiven me?" He pressed her hand. "Yes, yes. Why should I not forgive you, loving you as I do?" She looked at him with a beseeching air. "Listen, you must promise to respect me. Otherwise, I could never see you again." At first, he did not reply. A smile lurked beneath his mustache. Then he murmured, "I am your slave." She told him how she had discovered that she loved him on learning that he was to marry Madeleine Forestier. Suddenly, she ceased speaking. The carriage stopped. Duroy opened the door. "Where are we?" she asked. He replied, "Alight and enter the house. We shall be undisturbed there." "Where are we?" she repeated. "At my rooms. They are my bachelor apartments, which I have rented for a few days, that we might have a corner in which to meet." She clung to the cab, startled at the thought of a tete-a-tete, and stammered, "No, no, I do not want to." He said firmly, "I swear to respect you. Come, you see that people are looking at us, that a crowd is gathering around us. Make haste." And he repeated, "I swear to respect you." She was terror-stricken and rushed into the house. She was about to ascend the stairs. He seized her arm. "It is here, on the ground floor." When he had closed the door, he showered kisses upon her neck, her eyes, her lips. In spite of herself, she submitted to his caresses and even returned them, hiding her face and murmuring in broken accents, "I swear that I have never had a lover," while he thought, "That is a matter of indifference to me." And so, Bel Ami comes to its quiet close. Georges Duroy, once a poor soldier, now stands at the height of society, polished, powerful, and admired. Yet, behind the success, we sense the emptiness that ambition alone cannot fill. His journey through charm, calculation, and desire leaves a trail of choices, some triumphant, others quietly haunting. If this story has brought you a moment of calm reflection, please subscribe and leave a comment. Your support helps us continue sharing thoughtful, peaceful tales like this one. Now breathe deeply, let the world of Paris fade away, and drift into restful sleep. Good night.